if your navigating principle is what is going to reduce your risk of getting sick, or maybe you reduce your risk of dying, or reduce everybody's risk of getting sick or dying, if that's like your main navigational compass, then everything else gets sacrificed to that. And I think that there's a lot more to life than keeping safe. There's a saying from Burning Man I like, safety third. Not sure what first and second are. But I mean, safety is not unimportant. Like, we're not supposed to be reckless, but you're not going to survive life. Like, you're going to die anyway. So then it becomes a matter of how do you live well?
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Safety third. It sounds funny, I know. And I'm not sure what 1 and 2 are, just as Charles says, but I get the point. If we put safety first, we may avoid sickness, injury, and death. But is that really the same as truly living and living well? This is episode 344, and our guest today is Charles Eisenstein. Charles is a father of 4 boys, an essayist, speaker, and the author of several books, including The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. Today, Charles holds a magnifying glass on what's happening in our society and in our lives. He helps us examine our choices and how we are responding to the fear narrative. And it's not just a philosophical discussion. He talks about why he and his wife decided to pull his child out of school. He discusses how our ancestors viewed death, and he covers how our current situation has a parallel in modern agriculture, which features, as you know, an attempt to use more and more control to subjugate the earth. And he points out the futility of that kind of effort. Finally, Charles invites us to pull back from the drama of our time that we might better engage with life. As we kick things off, I want to personally thank you for listening. This is one reason I read reviews at the end of the podcast, because I want to thank you and give you a shout out, just like you gave us one. But I also want to let you know about another podcast you might want to check out. Have you heard of The High Wire? The High Wire with Del Bigtree is worth your time if you're looking for brave, bold news. If you go to thehighwire.com, you'll find the interviews I mentioned, along with breaking news, particularly health-related breaking news, a number of resources, and even a community forum for connecting with others. We are so grateful for friends like Del and his team who are educating the public and defending health freedom. And this podcast is sponsored in part by Optimal Carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. The founders of Optimal Carnivore understand the amazing benefits of eating organ meats, but they found it difficult to source a variety of high-quality organ meat. Plus, they disliked the process of preparing them and trying to make them tasty. So, they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand. They freeze-dry the organs and encapsulate them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They chose New Zealand because it is a pure source, a pristine land with rich soil, lush greenery, and one of the cleanest environments on Earth. And they freeze-dry the organs to preserve all the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and enzymes. The products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished, and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal too. So Optimal Carnivore has created a unique blend of 9 different organs, a powerful combination including beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. It is their grass-fed organ complex, and it's a real nose-to-tail solution. Each organ, of course, contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile and provides a large range of nutrients that support all the major organs and glands. Optimal Carnivore believes everyone deserves easy access to the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and they want to take the guesswork and hassle out of eating organ meat. So check out their supplements. They're perfect for taking on the go, or if you're just trying to develop an appreciation for organ meats. They offer a grass-fed organ complex, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product. Order today at Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code WESTON10 to save 10% on all products. By the way, Optimal Carnivore also plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So again, go to Amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code WESTON10 to save 10% on all products. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Charles.
I'm happy to be here, Hilda.
Now, you are in the same situation that a lot of parents are right now, which is trying to make a decision about what's healthiest and best for your child. Tell us about your decision about schooling for your son and where that's landed.
Yeah, so Carrie, our son, was 7 years old when COVID hit, and we were set up to go to this beautiful Montessori school or maybe a Waldorf school. We had some options. And then it became apparent that, well, for one thing, our views on COVID and vaccination. Am I allowed to say that word? Is that going to get you flagged here?
No, happily, podcasts are still pretty uncensored, so go for it.
Yeah. Our views were at odds with most of the parents. And this was supposed to be, these are alternative schools. But at that time, people were defaulting into lockstep with the standard narrative. But, that's kind of always been true, right? I've never agreed with, my opinions have always diverged from the majority. So that's not a big deal, except now this is before the vaccines were even an issue, really. This is in, 2020. But we don't want them to wear masks all day and to never see a full human face and to have that normalized. And so that is the nudge that pushed us from internally disagreeing with the system, but still participating in it, to just not participating in that aspect of the system. And so we were able to find some other parents of like mind, and we made a little homeschooling pod, and we're really glad that we did.
And Charles, why did you draw the line on the mask thing?
Well, I can give all kinds of rational reasons why I disagree with masking, but none of those are the real reason. The real reason is just that it was just a no in my body. This is not what progress is. This is not the future, because there's always going to be a reason. Why not? If your navigating principle is what is going to reduce your risk of getting sick, or maybe you reduce your risk of dying, or reduce everybody's risk of getting sick or dying, if that's your main navigational compass, then everything else gets sacrificed to that. And I think that there's a lot more to life than keeping safe. There's a saying from Burning Man I like, safety third.
I like that too.
Not sure what first and second are, but safety is not unimportant. We're not supposed to be reckless, but you're not going to survive life. You're going to die anyway. So then it becomes a matter of, how do you live well? How do you live in full relationship?
Exactly. And I think it was in your essay, The Coronation, where you mentioned, if we say, okay, we'll wear masks, or we'll let our kids wear masks, or we'll go along with this narrative and stay apart from people, your question was simply, how long? And the follow-up question is, and what kind of life is that giving us?
Right. Yeah. Even back then, I was once instituted all of this distancing, lockdowns, quarantines, masking, it's not going to just go away, because the reason why we're doing it will always be here. You could imagine a society where everybody is permanently in a bubble, and at least, in a certain way of thinking, you're safer that way, plugged into the metaverse all the time, not in physical engagement with the material world, and keeping safe that way. Actually, you are not safer, because strong immunity depends on challenges. Living in an aseptic bubble is not going to actually make you healthier in the long run. Not only immunity, but a thriving internal ecosystem. You require intercourse with the rest of life. So even on its own premises of safety and security, it doesn't work. But what I'm saying is, okay, suppose it does keep you safer. Is that any way to live? The rationale for instituting that kind of inner and outer lockdown will never go away. I said there could be new viruses, new mutations, This was in April 2020, I was saying this. and got roundly criticized for that. But now, not to say I told you so, but because some of the things I said in there were not accurate. Actually, they turned out not to be. It was right at the beginning. But that one was, I think, quite prescient, that we can't rely on the authorities which thrive on control and which are immersed in an ideology of control to relent and hand us our freedoms back.
100%. And the other thing that comes to mind when you talk about having a safety first mentality, if we just thought we wanted to stay safe the rest of our lives, then we would do what I think Bill Murray did in some movie where he literally stayed inside of a house trying to avoid whatever pains and dangers there were out there. And do you know that like some kind of steamrolling crane construction gear came into his house and started knocking it down? In other words, we can't avoid the risks of life. And is it truly living if you're holed up in your house?
Right. And it like underneath that, it's based on a certain view of the world that says that the world, the universe, lacks any kind of intelligence. It's just this random melee of forces and masses bumping around, and therefore that any kind of meaningful, good life and ordered world requires humans to impose order on the world and to control the forces of nature and dominate the other beings of nature. But other societies, other cultures didn't see the world that way. They, for example, had a concept of fate or destiny, that when my time comes, it's going to come, whether it's getting sick from a virus or a wrecking ball, a meteor crashing into my house. I cannot avoid the trajectory of my life. Therefore, instead of living as safely as possible and minimizing risk, the question is, how do I live well? How do I recognize what is mine to do? Which may not be, to take every single risk. Like this is another point I've been making throughout this pandemic. It's not a black or white issue, this thing of safety. Like if we were facing a 50% death rate, I don't think there would be any question that we would stay away from each other for a while. If it were a death rate of one person on the planet will die if everybody doesn't totally change their lives, I think most people would agree that it's not worth it. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean we don't have compassion for that one person. But my friend Lauren Buckley puts it this way. She said, if what it took for you to survive would be to prohibit hugs for all human beings forevermore, would you do that? Most people would say, no, I'm not more important than humanity being able to hug each other. But collectively, our society is making the choice to ban hugs, figuratively speaking, in order to keep a very, very few people safe. So for me, it's a question of, okay, how many people and how important are hugs? And I think they're important. And I think singing together is important. And I think gathering together, dancing together, I think sociality is important. I think seeing each other's faces is important. I think children playing freely in the outdoors and the indoors is important. And that we need to remember the sacredness of those things alongside our considerations of safety. But those things typically don't enter into the calculus that informs public policy. And I'm saying they should enter in, not necessarily to ignore safety entirely, but we can't obsess about risk and safety and organize life along one metric. Otherwise, we will have no life worth living.
I just think your question is so important for us to ask ourselves, individually and corporately. How can we live well? And again, taking into account these, if you will, softer, more human values that we prize, like intimacy and collective joy and celebration and even collective mourning. I know so many people who have had family members, I'm raising my hand here as well, who have passed in the past couple of years, who have been unable to mourn collectively with their community in the loss that they've just experienced. There's something that we're missing by not asking the right question.
Yeah. Or how important is it to have loved ones around you as you're dying? Because a lot of people are dying alone because for the sake of safety, their relatives are not allowed to visit them in the nursing home, or they say goodbye through a plate of glass or through FaceTime. Where is that valued in public policy? So there's an inhumanity about the world of control. It, in a sense, ironically, paradoxically, in the name of preserving life, it is actually anti-life.
Wow, I just want to let that sink in for a moment. In the name of preserving life, it's actually anti-life.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned in your essay, The Coronation, the war on death. It's like they see death also, whoever it is that's wanting to control our current situation right now, they see it as the worst thing it could possibly ever happen. Whereas our ancestors saw it as a part of the cycle of life.
Right. And partly because their understanding of themselves, their identity, was a lot more communal, or you could say a lot more relational. Modernity has confined us in a very narrow conception and experience of self, because so much of what we consume is created by strangers and mediated through money and through technology. So we're not as woven into our social and ecological environment. We've become these narrow individuals that, the Cartesian self, the separate self, the soul encased in flesh, the mind encased in a body, and a consciousness generated by the brain. So if that's how you understand self, then death is the total annihilation of the self and the ultimate catastrophe for the ego. People who don't see the self that way, whether it's Christians and other theists who see themselves as maybe a little spark of God, who believe in an afterlife, or it could be Hindus or Buddhists who understand a much larger existence, or Aboriginal people, everybody except the modern human had a much larger understanding of self. And in that context, death is no longer so scary.
I hear what you're saying. And I also can't help but think, Charles, that right now, people are broadening their sense of self by saying, I need to do something for the broader community because I'm a part of that. So my responsibility, I've been told, is to get an injection because that's going to help my neighbor. So it's actually calling people to a broader understanding of who they are.
Yeah, I think that there is today an emerging consciousness, or a re-emerging consciousness of service to the whole. And that can be co-opted or hijacked for pretty much any purpose. But, even like going back to the Holocaust, most Germans who participated in the Holocaust firmly believed that they were doing something good. This was a prevailing morality. And if you took for granted, say, that Jews are polluting the race, and filthy, and, a hotbed of disease and corruption and so forth, then in good conscience, you would support policies to, tragically, well, maybe we have to eliminate them. This was not gibbering fiends, salivating over the prospect of, these were just normal people. So good intentions are no guarantee of a good outcome. We have to have critical thinking alongside our heart motivations.
So what's the fallacy in the way they're projecting this current situation and our need to get injected for our neighbor?
Well, I'm not as qualified as maybe some people you could interview about questions such as, do the injections actually prevent transmission, or for how long? Are they possibly, by providing a non-lethal selection pressure, are they actually intensifying mutations and creating new variants? There's all kinds of debates that we could get into about, whether they are actually doing as they say.
Mm.
But I will also say, like, as a more general principle, that technologies of control always breed the necessity for even more of them. We see the same pattern in, say, agriculture, where what initially seems to kill all those weeds and solve the problem eventually generates, Roundup resistant weeds. And what is the solution to that? More pesticides, a cocktail of herbicides. And that seems to work. Problem solved. But then there's even more resistance. And then you've, destroyed the soil biota and you have some other pest problem. And then what's the solution? More control. And so we're seeing this happen with the vaccines, where the initial promise of a final solution, which is another mind form of the totalitarian, the initial promise of a final solution, like that was what was promised. You get your injection and COVID will be gone. Well, then it became a booster. And now it never goes away. And what we end up living in is endless war. And the same pattern is in other branches of medicine, where the side effects of the medicines need even more medicines to alleviate the side effects. It's in the criminal justice system, where incarceration and punishment destroys families, destroys communities, breeds more crime. It's in foreign policy, where you bomb the terrorists and create more terrorists. This is what we are called by this pandemic to question. It's not simply the techniques of control. This one's better than that one. We should do this instead of that. It's also the whole mindset.
Coming up, Charles explains why he's wary of our tendency as human beings to identify one group as the source of a problem. And he also explains why he's grateful for the nudge or push that this time has given him to live as he truly desires.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Paleo Valley. I know exactly what some of my family members are going to be getting in their stockings this Christmas. Don't tell them, shh. It's Paleo Valley beef sticks. These sticks are tasty and can be enjoyed knowing that they are made with grass-fed, grass-finished beef from farms that practice rotational grazing here in the U.S. Plus, Paleo Valley beef sticks use old-world methods of fermentation, which gives the beef sticks a long shelf life without the use of harmful acids and chemicals. Our family loves them, especially the jalapeno and teriyaki flavors. I know it sounds really different, but they taste great. And beef sticks trump candy canes in the stocking every time. You can enjoy them on the go or a quick snack anytime, of course. So get yours now at paleovalley.com and use the code WISE for 15% off. Again, that's paleovalley.com and the code word WISE. And enjoy. One Earth Health. You already know the benefits of organ meat, but did you know that New Zealand's organ meats are up to 400% more nutrient dense than organ meat from other countries? That means you get a lot more vitamin A, K, and B, along with many other nutrients compared to other sources. Now you can get them in capsule form from One Earth Health. Their cattle are pasture-raised with no GMO or pesticides. Their capsules are filler-free, and each bottle comes with 200 capsules. And all One Earth Health products come with a lifetime warranty. So go to oneearthhealth.com and use the code WISE20 to get 20% off and free shipping. This offer is only for a limited time. So again, hurry because it won't last. Go to oneearthhealth.com and use the code WISE20 for 20% off any One Earth Health product. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. It sounds like this war on death and the war on germs that I think you also mentioned in the essay, The Coronation, all these wars put us at war against our own humanity in a way.
Mm-hmm. And against each other. Like that's part of the pattern too. Like who's the bad guy here? So, in the health freedom movement and the resistance to this, I'm very wary of the diagnosis of, well, this is obviously perpetrated by a conscious conspiracy of very evil people. Because I think that if somebody is immersed in the logic of control, then pretty much everything that they're doing makes sense. Even the cover-ups and the lying, well, it's for their own good. It's partly the ideology of progress, that the inexorable trend of history is that we get better and better at controlling the world, and as we do that, bring more and more benefits to humanity. So if you believe that, then okay, maybe this vaccine isn't working very well, but vaccines are good because they are, and we're extending control down to the genetic level. That's progress. So maybe there's some hiccups along the way, but we better not let that get out. We better not let people know that, because then they will get in the way of what we know is progress. Yeah, there's some bumps along the road, but someday we'll solve those problems. We'll make our control precise. That's the ideology. And anyone who is immersed in that, say Bill Gates, or Anthony Fauci, and they're going to enthusiastically do everything that they're doing right now. Now, I'm not saying okay, maybe there are some malevolent actors in a system that does in fact reward ruthlessness. But, as far as being the primary diagnosis of our problem today, I think it misses the point, and it risks that we remove all those bad guys, don't change the system, don't change the mythology behind the system, the ideology behind the system, and we end up with a new crop of people who are addicted to control.
I love what you're saying, because all along, Charles, I've noticed that it's not just those who are convinced of the ideology you just mentioned that are trying to control us and push us toward injections and thinking that's the final solution, who are creating an atmosphere of fear in our society, but it's also the people who are opposed to that ideology. And I sense that they're making us afraid of the injections. And I just feel like this huge fear narrative is enveloping us. How do we opt out of that altogether, like you said, and not just perpetuate the current system?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I'm afraid of the injections. And I even think that there might be something to the whole vaccine shedding thing. But I decided I'm not going to live my life in fear of that. I'm still going to socialize with people, including my dearly loved ones who have gotten vaccinated. We just had Thanksgiving together. And one thing I really appreciated about my family, there are some, one of my siblings and her husband, they're very pro-vax, unquestioningly pro-vax, as far as I know, very sciencey, and, I'm more on the other side of the spectrum, as is my brother. But we all decided, without even talking about it, that family is more important than opinions. A lot of what's going on here is not actually fear of the vaccine, and it's not actually fear of the unvaccinated on the part of the pro-vaccine people. It's more of I call it mob mentality, where it's fear of associating with the unclean, fear of associating with the heretics, the fear of being in the out group instead of the in group. And human beings are terrified of ostracism, terrified of being the mob's victims. So we, as humans, tend to display the attitudes that are accepted. We tend to conform out of that fear. And we're exquisitely attuned to what is going to bring ostracism and what will bring acceptance. So that's another dynamic that I'm very watchful for in the health freedom movement, because this revolution is not actually ultimately about the issues at hand. It goes a lot deeper than that. It is an opportunity to overturn that pattern of mob morality, that pattern of one section of humanity turning against another section, identifying them as the source of the problem and exterminating them, ostracizing them, dominating them, humiliating them, destroying them, like that whole pattern of us against them that divides humanity and incinerates 99% of our creativity in conflict, that can end. And this interruption in normality is an opportunity to end it.
I love that so much. I've actually landed where you have in terms of thinking if I shun my vaccinated neighbor or loved one, I'm doing exactly what I don't want them to do to me. There's no way I'm going to avoid hugging them or being with them if there's an opportunity, because I think our humanity is found in that compassion and that love. And we won't get anywhere. We'll remain in the same system, as you've said, if we treat them with that hostile and polarized opinion of their different choices.
Yeah. And that even extends to the subtle levels of rejection that take the form of judgment. You know, the idea that those are just sheeple, they're closed-minded, they're idiots, you know, they're fools. Like, put yourself in their shoes. You know, as I did with Bill Gates. Like, if you're in the environment and subject to the totality of influences, you might be the same. Who's to know?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that reminds me of an amazing story I read. I think it was in a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he said there was a young girl who had been violated repeatedly on a ship with some pirates. And she cast herself into the waters, preferring to drown than to undergo that fate. And he said, when we hear that story, of course, we take the side of that young girl, you know, who was victimized, and we, you know, think horrible thoughts of the pirates. He said, but if we had been raised under the same circumstance as that pirate, we would have been the same. So we need to have compassion for both in the story, the pirate who was doing that abusive stuff and the young girl. And I found that very, very moving and a reminder to me of how I want to live and how I want to see others.
Right. Because if you actually want to stop that kind of thing from happening and you misdiagnose the cause of it as the irremediably evil pirate, then you can go around trying to kill all the pirates. But if you leave the circumstances that create bloodthirsty pirates, rapacious pirates, intact, then you will always have more pirates to exterminate, and the war never ends. That's why we need to look at the conditions. It's just like in agriculture, actually. This is the same pattern. Mm-hmm. If you don't address soil health, if you don't address biodiversity, then you're going to have an endless succession of weeds and pests to go to war against. But if you say, okay, is this just like the random incursion of some evil pest, or is this a symptom of conditions? If you go to that level, then you ask different questions. What are the conditions? Oh, maybe, you know, the soil needs this or needs that, or we could bring in some new member of the community that will create a healthier ecosystem. I mean, there are people who seem like they're genius farmers, but really what they are simply doing is asking that question and observing to find the answer. Same thing for the human body. You know, is an infection, a viral infection, is that just some random thing that happens to you because of an evil pathogen? Or is that also perhaps a symptom of circumstances? So we could get into terrain theory, you know, that where what we call pathogens are, and I'm not saying that every disease could always be explained in this term, in these terms, but I think there's a lot to it, that in some cases, what we call pathogens are actually agents of a bodily process, of a cleansing process, or of a genetic upgrade, you know, that brings new, because viruses are vehicles of DNA transfer. And so like there are certain diseases that maybe have co-evolved with human beings and that you're supposed to get in childhood because they bring new DNA or they activate DNA, they do some epigenetic thing, I don't know. But this is just like a way of thinking that you can apply to health, you can apply to agriculture, you can apply to social change. It's called compassion.
Yes, Dr. Tom Cowan mentions in his book, Vaccines, Immunity, and the Changing Nature of Childhood Illness, he mentions that very thing, that what we consider an illness we want to get rid of, like you say, a weed, wiping it out of the garden, actually serves its purpose in the child's body. And those that have faced that illness and overcome it end up stronger and less likely to develop autoimmune conditions as they get older. It's a powerful, beautiful thing. And so I'm so glad you've brought up that, and also the agriculture bit, because of course, Joel Salatin, one of our favorite farmers, often talks about our need to kind of be a part of the beautiful choreography of nature. You know, we're not fighting, trying to dominate nature. We're working with it and learning from it. So I want to pivot for just a second, Charles, and ask you, do you have any personal practices that help you connect to your deepest sense of who you are and what system you're buying into in this life? Like, do you pray or meditate or use breath work? What do you personally do to cultivate that different attitude?
I guess I do all those things. I think whatever it is, it's sometimes necessary to pull back from the drama, pull out of the matrix, and for me, it's to remove myself from all of the dramas that are so intoxicating and so compelling, to remove myself from the identity, Charles Eisenstein, and all that I am, and just to like retreat sometimes, to get a new perspective, to realize like not to take everything so seriously. Even humor is a way to kind of pull back a second, and we all laugh together at all of the funny things that we're doing with each other and to each other, and we laugh at it. And that like is a moment of perspective. Actually, like pulling out of the drama actually enables me to come back into the drama as a better player, as a better actor, more fully devoted to making something beautiful of it. I don't really necessarily want to talk a whole lot about my own practices, but just to say that something of that nature helps us to live better, to step outside of life sometimes in some way helps us be in life better.
Well, speaking of pulling back, Charles, I have friends that are looking to create almost parallel communities or communities that are opting out of like-minded folks who want to live off the land and just, like you said, pull out of the matrix. What do you think of that?
To some extent, I did that. We did that in my family by taking Carrie out of school and making our own little mini school. And same with healthcare. We have pretty much completely left the mainstream healthcare system. I mean, I've never been in it. I haven't been to a doctor since 1991. But, we have our own parallel way of taking care of ourselves that works a lot better than the mainstream system, except maybe for acute trauma. Like, I don't know, if I were in a traffic accident and my limb was severed or something like that, I'd probably go to a hospital. But in various areas of life, we have stepped out. And in other areas, to some extent, like food, we still go to Trader Joe's, but we're getting a lot of our food locally. But we haven't fully stepped out, but we might have to at some point what happens if they shut down the bank accounts of anyone who's unvaccinated and don't let us into stores and have, a monitoring system where you have to show your pass to do anything.
Or what happens, not to cultivate fear, but what happens if they put these spike proteins in food, which I understand they're attempting to do? So it might be a good idea to have your own food system.
Yeah, like there could be various developments that give that little nudge, just like masking school children gave me. They give that nudge that's like, okay, I'm not going to be in the system anymore. So, I mean, it could extend even to money. That's why like people are talking about cryptocurrencies as an alternative to the dominant financial system. Entertainment, like, okay, you can't go to a concert. To go to a Rage Against the Machine concert, you have to show your vaccine passport. Fine. We'll have our own concerts. And maybe it's underground. Maybe it's small scale of necessity. But, it wasn't that great anyway. And the small ones are better. We were just at a gathering the other night, and people brought instruments, and some of the musicians were really good. But even if they weren't, it's still more fun than attending a big show. Or I don't know, it's a different kind of fun. So these are examples of parallel institutions that are starting to spring up. And in a way, I hope that the authorities don't relent. And I hope that it's not too easy just to rejoin a world that was actually kind of crazy to begin with. This is a good thing, this little nudge to like really live the way we want to live and not accept these good enough or barely good enough compromises. This is a tremendous chance that we have to live the way that we want to. So I'm in a way grateful for the push that goes along with the pull of the attraction of living in a more communal, more ecological, more local way. Like the push as the alternative becomes more and more intolerable.
Yes, because the kind of living you're describing of intimate concerts, house concerts, and food with family and friends that we've raised or grown ourselves, these are glimpses of the world you described in your book, the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In many ways, my life has gotten a lot better. It's gotten smaller in a certain way and bigger in some other ways. Like, it's not like I'm cut off from the world. I'm still, speaking to you, doing podcasts. I have an interaction with the world, and ultimately the world is one, not two. The parallel institutions, there's still, we're still going to have some ways in which we're all one human family. Unless, I don't know, maybe eventually reality itself bifurcates, and or maybe the mainstream system falls apart and everybody comes and joins the parallel society that is emerging.
I have two more questions to ask you as we wrap up. Is there a way to usher in the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible?
Yes. And anybody who tells you that they know what that way is and that they have a grand plan and here's your role and here's her role and here's my role and here's the most important thing to do and here's the highest impact and this isn't worth doing, they're full of it. The plan is far, far beyond human comprehension. So what's important is to recognize what is yours to do in the plan. And you recognize that through the communication to the heart that reveals what your role is by making you care, making you love, making you passionate about something, making you feel a yes. Like it's a basic biological orientation system because you are life and you know how to contribute to life. Just like any other species in an ecosystem, there's a deep inner guidance that is of the body, that is of the heart, and only tertiarily is of the mind. But all I'm saying is you know what to do. And it's important to know that there is a plan and that this more beautiful world is real and that we wouldn't be here if it weren't. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't possible. And you wouldn't be here if you didn't have a role to play in making it a reality. So once you hold firm that knowledge, then you're oriented to what is mine to do, to serve these conditions.
Yeah, I love it. I keep telling people, you know exactly what to do. Stop saying you don't know what to do. Because I know that they do. You're right. There's something inside of each of us that if we attune to it, we can become more and more clear in terms of what our purpose is, what we should do in any given situation. All we have to do is tune in. And I think sometimes people discard that because they've been trained not to pay attention. But if we pay attention, I think we can really ultimately fulfill our role. And so I have to pose to you the question I often do at the end. If the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
Don't listen to anybody who says that they know what the one thing that you should do is, or at least really run it by your intuition. Because for one person, it might be just to get more sunlight. For another person, it might be move your body. For another person, it might be stop eating sugar. For another person, it might be get out of that house that is infested with mold. You could be doing every single other thing right. And if you have a mold problem in your house, you could be really sick. So I'm not going to give a general formula, a general prescription for that.
Well, I appreciate this time. I'm so thankful for you. And we'll put links in the show notes so folks can find your essays on Substack and the whole shebang. And again, I'm extremely grateful that you took the time for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm grateful for the work that you're doing and of the Weston A. Price Foundation. And yeah, we're doing it.
Yes. And can we put a little PS on here about you and your brother?
Yeah. So John and I, when my first batch of kids were little, I went the whole shebang, and was making lacto-fermented soda. Until they were like 6 or 7 years old, they thought that soda was this like kind of sour fizzy beverage. Like that's what they thought soda was. And so when the Weston Price conference, the Wise Traditions conference or whatever it's called, came, like we went and shared the soda, sold it, we didn't make a huge amount of money, but it was fun. And then my very first keynote speech ever was at a Weston Price Foundation conference. I think it was in 2004. And I'm embarrassed to say that I, was such a greenhorn that I, actually like read my speech. So that was my first keynote speech ever. Since then, now I always speak without notes and spontaneously, but I still have like such a warm spot in my heart for the organization and appreciation for what it's doing in the world.
Well, we have one for you too. So thank you, Charles. Our guest today was Charles Eisenstein. Visit his website at charleseisenstein.org to discover all of his resources like podcasts and upcoming events and his wonderful essays on his Substack account. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. My all-time favorite podcast, from Emily in Love. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but this is by far my favorite. I have listened to nearly every single episode over the years, and it is packed with so much helpful information that has been pivotal to my health journey. The host does a fantastic job of interviewing people with a broad scope of ideas and does not shy away from controversial topics. Emily in Love, you are so sweet to write this. I really appreciate this review. If anybody else would like to leave us a review, you know what to do. Go to Apple Podcasts and click on the ratings and reviews button. Give us a number of stars and tell us what you think of the show. It helps make the show more attractive to prospective listeners. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.